नमस्ते बोजु बजाइमा स्वागत छ। मेरो नाम भृकुटी राई। गत वर्ष हामीले गफ गाफ विथ बोजु बजाइ हाम्रो युट्युब च्यानलमा लन्च गरेका थियौँ। दिस वाज अ 4-part मिनी सिरिज। तपाईले हेर्नु भएको छैन भने कृपया हाम्रो युट्युब च्यानलमा गएर हेर्नु होला। द रिजन वाइ वी स्टार्टेड गफ गाफ विथ बोजु बजाइ सिरिज वाज टु bring more women, their expertise, their opinions on issues that mattered at the national, at the local level, whether it was about nationalism, about laws relating to the lives of women, for people from marginalized communities, whether that was about national security or just women's experiences in the online and offline spaces all around us. यी राष्ट्रिय सरोकारका विषयहरूमा महिलाहरूको सहभागिता न्यून देखेर नै हामीले यो वेब सिरिज सुरु गरेका थियौं। Today's episode is an extended cut of our interview with journalist Abha Lal. Abha has written extensively on human rights and also about the new Nepali constitution and how it affects women and people from different marginalized sections of the Nepali society. This interview was recorded in August 2020. Just months after Nepal's MPs had passed a bill to amend the Citizenship Act. र यो नागरिकता ऐनमा आएको संशोधनले कुनै पनि विदेशी महिलाले नेपाली नागरिकसँग विवाह गरेपछि नेपाली नागरिकता पाउनको लागि 7 वर्ष कुर्नुपर्ने प्रावधान राखिएको छ। यसअघि यस्तो कुनै पनि प्रावधान थिएन। त्यो संशोधन भएको केही महिनापछि नागरिकता सम्बन्धी नयाँ अध्यादेश ल्याइयो। तर त्यसको केही महिनामै सुप्रिम कोर्टको अर्डरले सो अध्यादेशलाई खारेज पनि गरिदियो। एन्ड एज अफ नाउ एभ्रिथिङ इज अप इन द एयर व्हेन इट कम्स टु न्यू लज रिलेटिङ टु द सिटिजनशिप प्रोभिजन्स इन द न्यू कन्स्टिट्युसन। अरू कुरा त थाहा भएन, तर यो वर्ल्ड्स बेस्ट कन्स्टिट्युसनमा चाहिँ महिलाहरूप्रति भएका विभेदकारी प्रावधानहरू भने जस्ताको त्यस्तै छन्। र यही वर्ल्ड्स बेस्ट कन्स्टिट्युसनले 6 वर्ष पूरा गरेको उपलक्ष्यमा अगेन टाइम वी आर गफ गाफिङ अबाउट हाम्रो विभेदकारी राज्य र त्यो राज्य चलाउने फ्रेजाइल मेल इगो भएको ब्रोहरू बारे। सो प्लिज इन्जोय।
Thank you so much for joining us, Abha. You know, a couple of months ago, one of our listeners wrote to us, and she has a young daughter. Basically, she told us, oh, my young daughter came up to me today, and she asked me, Mamu, yo nagrikta ko halla ke ho? Ke bhairahcha yo nagrikta ko halla? And her mom was asking us if we could do an episode on citizenship, like an explainer specifically for the young adults. So we have invited you today to explain, first of all, the concept of citizenship, but also, you know, why we women especially have been sort of contesting the provisions, the current provisions that were introduced in 2015, all related to citizenship. So I suppose the first question would be, what does this document mean? What is the meaning of citizenship when you talk about it in the context of a nation state or in the context of the constitution, for example?
Yeah, so citizenship is a document that basically proves that you belong to a particular nation state. In a lot of places, political, economic, and social rights are seen as different things. So there might be a different document for things like economic rights, which involve getting welfare checks and things like that. But in Nepal, political, bhayo, legal, social, all your rights are tied to that one citizenship document. So other than traveling abroad, for which you need a passport, to register for a college or school, you need a citizenship certificate. To inherit property, you need a citizenship certificate. For basic, like bank khata khulna lai dekhi, all kinds of like life death situation ma, that is the document that proves that you are from Nepal and you're entitled to rights and benefits that come with being a Nepali citizen. So it's a very important document without which just day-to-day life would be very hard for someone. You can't apply for Lok Seva ko jobs, you can't have a bank account unless you're living like very off the grid. Even then, like all kinds of things require you to prove that you're a citizen of Nepal to be entitled to anything that the state might give you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the Nepali state has changed? Because the citizenship provisions have changed so many times over the last sort of, 4 or 5 decades. But at every moment, there has always been a certain population that has been discriminated against. So can you just talk about maybe the history of discrimination when we talk about citizenship and who is eligible to be a Nepali citizen?
Yeah. So Nepal's history of giving formal citizenship certificates is not that long compared to some other countries. Our first Citizenship Act was in 1952. And oilebata compare garyo भने चाहिँ in some ways it was way more progressive than the provisions we have now. Anybody who was born in Nepal or anybody who married a citizen of Nepal was entitled to Nepali citizenship. Now we don't have citizenship by birth. So it was a completely different framework, Matthew. Maybe it's debatable in terms of how many people actually had it, because Titibela, I think compared to now, a lot more people could make do without a citizenship certificate. So in absolute numbers, I'm sure a lot more people are legal citizens now, but the provisions were much more flexible and broader with the first act. And as with a lot of other things, when Mohindra came into power with the Panchayat regime is when a lot of those provisions got changed.
सो अब तपाईँले भर्खर कुरा गर्नुभयो नेपालको सन्दर्भमा चाहिँ यो नागरिकता किन महत्त्वपूर्ण हुन्छ भनेर, बिकज अनलाइक इन अदर प्लेसेस नागरिकताको चाहिँ हरेक हाम्रो जस्तो पढाइदेखि लिएर ब्याङ्किङ रोजगारी सबैमा चाहिन्छ होइन. अनि यो कुरा भइरहँदा अनि अहिले चाहिँ आएर यो बहस चाहिँ गएको भनौँ न 2015मा हाम्रो जुन यो नयाँ अहिलेको हाम्रो संविधानलाई चाहिँ पारित गर्यो, त्यसपछिदेखि लेट्स से लास्ट 5 इयर्समा हाम्रो जुन किसिमको यो रिपिटेडली वी बिन हियरिङ अल दिस सर्ट अफ लाइक प्रोभिजन्स होइन, यो थपिरहेछ, फेरि अहिले अमेन्ड हुने प्रोसेसमा छ होइन. सो खासमा चाहिँ लाइक वाट आर सम अफ द इस्युज द्याट एक्टिभिस्ट अराउन्ड द कन्ट्री हेभ टेकन इस्युज विथ?
Yeah, so 2015 को कन्स्टिट्युसनले नै अनइक्वल राइट्सलाई चाहिँ इन्श्राइन गरे हो. त्यो पपुलर स्लोगन चाहिँ र होइन व हो भनेर चाहिँ it was about how interim constitution it said if you're a woman, if you or your husband or the father of your child are Nepali, then your child is entitled to Nepali citizenship. To change garera, it became and, which in legal terms it's a little bit confusing, but in the simplest terms what it means was that matrilineal line bata amale chai afno chora chorilai citizenship dina nasakne banaidiyo constitution le nai. अनि कन्स्टिट्युसनले नै त्यो फ्रेमवर्क बनाइसकेपछि चाहिँ अहिलेको एक्ट चाहिँ यो 2006 कै सिटिजनशिप एक्टमा अमेन्डमेन्ट इन्ट्रोड्युस गर्न लाग्छ, which hews closely to the provisions that were outlined in the constitution. But त्यसभन्दा नि एकदमै नयाँ त्यो चाहिँ a foreign woman married to a Nepali man was previously entitled to citizenship immediately. अनि cross border marriage धेरै ठाउँमा धेरै हुन्छ, but primarily चाहिँ मधेसमा एकदम धेरै हुने हो. Since the 1980s, women have never had to wait any number of years to get Nepali citizenship after getting married. But यो नयाँ provisionमा चाहिँ 15-year waiting period को कुरा हाल्दा छ. So if you are Indiaमा born भएको महिला married to a Nepali man, you are not entitled to Nepali citizenship immediately. That's been a big issue. So mother ko kura bhayo ra married women ko kura bhayo. So it's just unequal to women in most ways. Ani arko kura chai yo 15 barshako jun kura cha, a foreign man married to a Nepali woman doesn't even have that option. Your naturalization ko, they have to go through a whole different process that's independent of marriage. So jun ekdam patriarchal idea cha of women being either wives or daughters, and that's the daughters belonging to men. That's the only path to citizenship. Ekdam constitutionally or legally nai men and women aren't equal bhanera provisions banaeko cha. So there's a lot of regressive provisions. अनि जुन promise थियो equality को, the constitution देखि नै हराएको हो. But as the years go by, I think people in Nepal were all seeing यो इन्श्राइन भएको चाहिँ लिगली कसरी इम्प्लिमेन्टेसनमा पुरै इनइक्वालिटी हरेक स्टेजमा इम्बेड गरेको देखिन्छ भनेर.
So when these conversations happen in the public space about citizenship, and when women, for example, contest the current provisions, and this has been going on forever, where men in power, men on Twitter, like, they always use the same reasons to justify the current citizenship provisions, whether it be a threat to national security, or whether it be, oh, well, if a foreigner comes and, has children, then the children might turn into like spies, or, why are Nepali women getting married to foreign men even? I remember reading an article regarding that. So can you talk a little bit about why, like, especially, I mean, we share an open border with India, but why do politicians always bring up national security and sovereignty as ways to justify these regressive provisions?
I think a lot of it comes down to what we've been indoctrinated into since the panchayat system. Na? Yote des, yote bhasa, all these things, we've cultivated this real myth of national uniformity. अनि देशको डिफ्रेन्ट पार्टहरूमा चाहिँ कस्टमहरू कति डिफ्रेन्ट छ, what is normal to a certain ethnic group or regional group. I think people in the hills, actually not even specifically in the hills, यो पावरमा जो हाम्रो hill Brahmin men धेरै हुनुहुन्छ, I think a lot of them don't quite even understand that cross-border marriages are an extremely common phenomenon. सबैजनाको तराईमा हेर्यो भने, not just Madhesis, like अरू ग्रुपहरूको पनि, the border, it's an extremely porous border. There's no real separation between म आफ्नो तराईमा गाउँ जाँदा कहाँ इन्डिया छिर्यो कहाँ नेपाल हो भनेर क्लियरली थाहा पनि हुँदैन. So I think this idea of कति porous छ border, हाम्रो decision making power भएको मान्छेहरू don't quite want to understand or don't understand. So all these debates about your national sovereignty operate on a very like ideological plane, where they think that Nepal ekdam like pure ढाका टोपी मात्र लाउने, like very certain kind of cultural values भएको nation हो, when we're a very, very diverse nation in many ways. So त्यो पञ्चायत hangover चाहिँ अलि यति वर्ष भइसके पनि, even though we got rid of panchayat system 1990 मै, a lot of the cultural messaging has continued to dictate how politicians make decisions. So I think that's definitely part of that.
अघि त्यो भनेको कुरा जस्तै हाम्रो जस्तो नागरिकता नहुँदाखेरि चाहिँ विशेष गरी महिलाहरूलाई, एन्ड स्पेशली इफ दे आर रिलाइङ अन द हस्बेन्ड टु गेट देयर सिटिजनशिप, त्यस्तो अवस्थामा चाहिँ वाट आर सम अफ द लाइक च्यालेन्जेस अर सम अफ द इस्युज द्याट वुमेन स्पेशली भनौँ न मधेसमा हुनुहुन्छ भने र त्यहाँ क्रस बोर्डर म्यारेज हुन्छ, त्यस्तो अवस्थामा चाहिँ यो 15 वर्ष अर इभन इफ दे रिड्युस द्याट टु 7 years, दे किप सेइङ it's for everybody, होइन, but obviously certain section of the society is being affected more than the others. So it's those certain examples चाहिँ कस्तो कस्तो हुन सक्छ with without having a citizenship चाहिँ you'll have like twice the hurdle as someone who might be in the same state just because you are not from a certain place.
So first चाहिँ यो मधेसीहरू specifically भनेको छैन, why are you making it about मधेसीs पहाडीs भन्ने जुन allegation आइरहेको हुन्छ. I understand it on one level, but the thing that people saying that are missing is that यो कारण के हो त, like कहिले नगरेको waiting period suddenly implement गर्ने ideological reason understand गर्न खोज्यो भने, it dates back a long time, like trying to separate Nepal from India and like trying to cultivate an idea of Nepali national identity that is oppositional to Indian identity. And Madhesis have always stood in a little bit of liminal space with that because they're seen as being Indian. So explicitly Madhesi or like exclude garna bhanera nabanaye pani, when we approach it from like a historical analysis garna khojyo bhane, it's very self-evident that that is sort of the reason behind a lot of these explanations and policies. So त्यो एउटा कुरा भयो. And in terms of people who don't have citizenship, 7 वर्ष 15 वर्षसम्म what kind of vulnerabilities they'll face मा चाहिँ, so North India पनि South Nepal मधेस पनि overwhelmingly patriarchal society हो. अनि it's very often छोरीलाई नागरिकता नदिनु बिहार उत्तर प्रदेशमा पनि अनि तराईमा पनि एकदमै common phenomenon हो. Suppose a young person from Bihar gets arranged married to somebody इन महोत्तरी, let's say, अनि आमा बुवाले नागरिकता बनाइदिएको छैन भने they won't even have Indian citizenship for 10-15 years. आमा बुवाले नबनाइदिएको punish गर्न the person जसको बनाइदिएन, that makes absolutely no sense. And it makes them even more vulnerable. So suppose like domestic abuse situation, or the marriage doesn't work out for some reason, or just the person wants economic independence, like marriage which is a completely reasonable thing to want. Nagarikta bina not a bank account khulna milcha, not a lok sewaलाई apply गर्न मिल्छ, अनि independently बच्चालाई पाल्न try गर्यो भने without the husband, it becomes almost impossible to do that. And the power dynamics, already family ma women are vulnerable patriarchal societies ma, you legally, constitutionally nai less than banaidiyo bhane, it's not just about like, although obviously dignity ko kura, equality ko kura is very important, but like tangible implication ma herne ho bhane nai people will just have harder lives. अनि I just also find it interesting that मधेसी women को कुरा गर्दा यो dowry death हुन्छ के भनेर, all of which is true. अनि त्यो mode मा चाहिँ vulnerability, like NGO हरू, a lot of like philanthropic actor हरू बुझ्छन्, but citizenship पनि त त्यही नै link हो नि. Like already power कम भएको situation मा legally पनि if you don't have the right to be independent, that power dynamic is going to get even more skewed. अनि त्यसको consequence चाहिँ यो national sovereignty हरू जे होस् नहोस्, actual women को life चाहिँ harder definitely हुन्छ.
So, Abha, just now you said, how a lot of people residing on the borderlines, or perhaps, you mentioned this liminal space where it is actually the external gaze that judges whether or not they're Nepali enough, and therefore do they deserve to be a Nepali citizen, and therefore do they deserve to have this document that proves that they're a Nepali citizen. Where does this stem from? Like, where does this sort of othering, I suppose, where does it emerge from?
Interestingly enough, first citizenship act थियो हाम्रो 1952 को, that was a lot more progressive than what we have now. It was citizenship by birth. There was no differentiation between naturalized citizenship and citizenship by descent. Anybody married to a Nepali citizen was entitled to Nepali citizenship. Ani Panchayat Kalma चाहिँ Mahindra had a very singular idea of who a Nepali was. A lot of legal policies were about everybody speaking Nepali, everybody having like very similar cultural values and things like that. Citizenship ma चाहिँ Mahindra Palama के भयो भने, it was the first time there was a division made between naturalized citizenship and citizenship by descent. And because in addition to being very ethnocentric, एकदमै patriarchal पनि understanding भएको government भएकोले descent को line चाहिँ was only through men. So that's when the roots of a lot of our problems began. 60s देखि नै त्यो descent naturalization को difference. 1990 को आन्दोलन पछि पनि not much really changed. अनि 2006 मा नै first time gender diversity को पनि कुरा आयो in a way that a lot of activists now rightly understand to be inadequate. But 2006 मा only opening भयो. And I think a lot of the frustration that people are feeling comes from the fact that alikati progress paisageko pani, we've taken just a bunch of steps backward exactly to that Mahindra Pala ko 60s ko understanding, which is just really frustrating on a lot of levels.
अनि जस्तो यो जुन हाम्रो अहिलेको जुन नयाँ संविधान आएको छ हैन, त्यसपछि हाम्रो जुन सुरुको स्पेशली अमङ अ लट अफ फेमिनिस्ट भनौँ न त्यति बेलाको लागि एटलिस्ट शहर केन्द्रित फेमिनिस्टहरूले कुरा यो उठाउँदाखेरि चाहिँ यसको विवेककारी प्रावधान आउँदाखेरि चाहिँ आमाको नामबाट नागरिकता दिन सहज हुनु पर्यो भनेर कुराहरू उठेको थियो हैन. तपाईले अघि भन्नुभएको जस्तै लाइक वी मुभ्ड अ फ्यु स्टेप्स फरवर्ड बट देन टु लाइक अगेन मुभ फ्यु स्टेप्स ब्याक. सो यसमा चाहिँ जस्तो अनि गएको केही वर्षहरूमा चाहिँ जस्तो अब स्पेशली यो वेटिङ पिरियड बढाएपछि यो नेपाली नागरिकलाई बिहे गर्ने पुरुष भर्सेस नेपाली नागरिकलाई बिहे गर्ने महिलाको जुन यो दुईटामा विभिन्न खालको प्रावधान आएसँगै सो अघि जस्तो यो हाम्रो 2072 को यो संविधान आएपछि जुन किसिमको यसले यो बहस सुरु गर्यो नि यो
नेचरलाइज भर्सेस यो डिसेन्ट सिटिजनसिप कसले चाहिँ पास अन गर्न सक्ने नसक्ने भन्ने कुरा आउँदाखेरि र गएको अब भनौँ न गएको 4-5 वर्षमा यो बहस अझै चुलिँदै जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ we've sort of seen that जस्तो आमाको नामबाट नागरिकता भन्नेहरू चाहिँ sort of like एउटा एउटा समूह भनौँ न अब so they've only been sort of like advocating for those kind of things without taking into consideration about what happens to those who get married अनि उहाँहरूले अघि तपाईँले भन्नुभएको जस्तै जुन यो वेटिङ पिरियडको कुराहरू आइरहेछ सो तपाईँले गएको केही वर्षहरूमा चाहिँ हाउ डु यु सी the different kind of demands that's coming around यही भनौँ न यो विवेककारी प्रावधान छन् त छ भन्छ तर there are different groups who sort of only looking at it. Let's say I feel what we strongly feel is like the intersectionality ko bahas chahi alikati kam bhako ho ki that they're looking at all women as like one single unit and this is the only thing that matters to all the women of Nepal bhane jastै भयो नि त तर त्यो intersectional कुरा चाहिँ different region मा हुनुहुन्छ भने you might your demands or your interpretation of some of the rights related to the citizenship might be slightly different. So what has your observation been in terms of how the movement or how the conversations regarding we need equal rights भनेर अगाडि बढेको छ तर if it's whether or not it's been able to also take forward certain अरू section of the society को पनि demands with that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So bluntest terms मा चाहिँ the way I see it मधेसी rights को कुरा गर्ने धेरैजना पुरुषहरू हुनुहुन्छ and they have a lot of values about patriarchal families and they are sexist, a lot of them are. And a lot of people in the women's rights movement say pahadi background bata aeko bhayera they share some of the same kinds of ideas about Madhesis not being truly Nepali or less deserving of Nepaliness that their male counterparts do. So दुवै ग्रुपहरुको आफ्नै prejudices भएर चाहिँ there's been kind of a separation in the two agendas. So 2015 को कुरामा चाहिँ मधेसी एक्टिभिस्टहरु धेरै कुरा गर्ने चाहिँ यो naturalized citizenshipले you can't take any of the highest government offices and यो naturalized or descent को discrimination चाहिँ किन भनेर त्यसमा बढी एक्टिभिजम थियो अनि women को चाहिँ आमाको नामबाट पनि नागरिकता हुनुपर्छ भनेर थियो which both of those make absolute sense as demands but because त्यो ग्रुपहरु नै अलि homogeneous भएर चाहिँ I think there's been a willingness for each group to throw the other one under the bus which I think became more prominent in the past couple of months यो amendment को कुरामा चाहिँ what I've been hearing from a lot of mainstream women's rights activists is that यो 15 वर्ष हो भने चाहिँ महिला पुरुष दुवैको waiting period same हुनुपर्छ which from an intersectional point of view completely misses the point that 0 years हुनुपर्छ waiting period like पाइराखेको महिलाहरु बिहा गरेर आएर to make them suddenly have to wait 15 years and the things I was talking about before in terms of कसरी त्यसले vulnerability हरुलाई exacerbate गर्छ त्यो कुरालाई अलि ignore गरेर चाहिँ the conversation has more been about just like theoretical equality which makes sense in actual मान्छेहरुको life कसरी impact हुन्छ भनेर हेर्ने हो भने चाहिँ men women दुवैको 15 वर्ष हुनुपर्छ भन्ने demand I personally think makes absolutely no sense. So I think there's a real need for citizenship ko kurama chai investment bhayeko it's all Madhesis and it's all women just because the constitution has sort of reduced us to that part of our identity. Ani common ground khojna nasakema chai I think the movements are going to continue to be fragmented and not really meet the needs of people who are the most vulnerable.
Different demands and different groups have different priorities in regards to what demands will serve their communities the best. But when we actually go into negotiating or as activists when they start putting demands in front of the state, how should we frame the demands so that they're not just treating women as a single homogenous group and the demands actually serve the purpose of both your naturalized citizenship ma bhayeko bhedbhav and citizenship by descent ma bhayeko bhedbhav pani like because when you're legislating you can't create different laws for different communities, right? So I mean what's the way forward?
I definitely do not have all the answers, but I think a basic thing that I have noticed is that women's activist spaces is overwhelmingly Pahari women, and Madhesi activist spaces it's overwhelmingly men, with a couple of like token people from other groups in each sort of camp. So having more diversity has become such an empty word, but like really making an effort to include voices of people from different like class, caste backgrounds and things like that while making demands. And a lot of that also like not being so Kathmandu centric and seeking out legislators, हाम्रो mayorहरू हुनुहुन्छ कहाँ कहाँको, like talking to people outside of Kathmandu is one place to start. I think I might be accused of being like एकदमै हावामा उडेको, but in my ideal world, like 1952 जस्तै, we wouldn't really even have a division between naturalized citizenship and descent citizenship. It just seems so commonsensical at this point because that's what we've been doing for 50 years. But maybe there's a way to be more ambitious with what it is that we're asking for. About descent naturalization abolish नगर्ने हो भने पनि at least your 15 वर्षको waiting period men women दुवैलाई same को सट्टामा, why not 0 years waiting period for men married to Nepali women as well as women married to Nepali men. So yeah. I think being more ambitious in our demands and asking for more and not just piecemeal things that we think these men are going to give us might be one place to start. And also ultimately, I think a lot of it does come down to the fact that a lot of our lawmakers are bound men, and even if identity to no boy, people who share their politics are people who are making our laws and like deciding how Nepali society should be. So just restructuring the state, that's going to be a very slow process. But over time, when that happens, hopefully there will be more ideas of who's Nepali and who's not, and non-patriarchal understandings of the state. That might help us in the long run. So I don't have any answers for what should happen immediately, but I do think diversifying who we're having conversations with is one way to start.
Yeah. And in what language we're having those conversations as well. Great. So, a last question as a way to kind of wrap this up, because Brikuti and I always talk about how conversations around citizenship are happening on Twitter and what sort of comments women receive, when they make demands for equal citizenship rights, or when a Madhesi woman makes certain demands when it comes to citizenship, So as an observer, because you're a journalist, you're a researcher, you're a writer, and I'm sure you're observing the Nepali Twitter landscape every now and then. As an observer, how would you describe the Twitter talk around citizenship, Nepal?
I think citizenship bhayo, nationalism bhayo, all these like lofty ideas, I don't know what it is that all these men are afraid of. Your national security ko jun kura garcha, I understand like theoretically that a terrorist would come and I don't know, like blow up Singhadarbar or something. Is that the barometer through which like thousands of people who cross the border every day are just regular people trying to live their lives? Just the idea that anybody is a potential threat looms so large in the minds of so many people who are like Twitter ko des raksha koru. So that psychological thing that I think is also related to like panchayat education and things like that. Yeah, just don't be afraid of people crossing the border. Thousands of people are doing it every day. I wish more people would understand that. And beyond that, obviously, the patronizing any woman making any sort of demand is whiny and stupid.
Yeah.
आफूलाई सुट गर्ने बेलामा you say the world is like a global village, like the country is like literally exporting human resource, and then to not give certain kind of benefits to people who actually are born here and living here. So this idea of borders just आफ्नो सहजताको अनुरूप चाहिँ यसलाई like our leaders from 1950s देखि नै the way they've looked at the like country folks go rights, and then it just seems very hypocritical the way they talk about rights of Nepalese who literally are on the margins in the country versus those who sort of cross over, like सात समुद्र पारी जाँदाखेरि चाहिँ suddenly these rights become very important to them. तर आफ्नै देशमा हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ नबुझ्नु र यसलाई acknowledge नगर्नु चाहिँ सायद ठुलो खाडल हो.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add the fact that Nepali literature भनेकै हाम्रो half our writers are from Darjeeling, and you're not the people who are so like happy to celebrate हाम्रो literature ko hero. Just the fact that there's so much cognitive dissonance there, that somebody who's from Darjeeling is completely different from somebody who's from Bihar. That comes from obviously an ethnocentrism, a lot of layers of prejudice that I think people sometimes don't fully examine. Yeah, I think I would like to encourage anybody who thinks Darjeeling is fundamentally different from like Patna. Why? There's no real reason for that.
So while we were preparing for this episode, I was really looking into our own family history, just because Mero last name Rai, because the Darjeeling connection live, and the fact that I was looking up some of the articles about how Nepalese was so quick to own up Prashant Tamang as their own, because he looks like what a Nepali would look like with the last name and things like that. And timle bhane jastै Darjeelingko Nepali writers celebrate गर्ने कुरा. So a lot of my family is in India, and a lot of my family members उहाँहरूले नेपालको नागरिकता पनि लिनु भएको छ हैन, but nobody questions them CDO कार्यालयमा जाँदाखेरि हैन. तर त्यही कुरा चाहिँ यदि somebody who lives, let's say, West Bengal को पारी बस्ने दार्जिलिङ रुट्स भएको नेपाली ब्याकग्राउन्ड भएको मान्छेलाई चाहिँ नेपालमा आउँदाखेरि you are one of us भन्ने महसुस गराउने, उता जाँदाखेरि ए सबैजना नेपाली बोल्छ आई फिल सो एट होम भन्ने, तर त्यही नेपाली बोल्ने नै तर हाम्रो विराटनगरकै छन् भने लाइक दे माइट वर्क इन जोब पनि विराटनगर बस्ने मान्छेलाई नै चाहिँ विराटनगरको स्टुडियो कार्यालयमा चाहिँ त्यो खाले व्यवहार नपाउँदाखेरि चाहिँ it's very clearly like where this discrimination stems from, अनि कसलाई चाहिँ हामी आफ्नो भन्न चाहन्छौँ versus कसलाई भन्न चाहदैनौँ भन्ने कुरा जुन चाहिँ हामी त होइन होइन भनेर जहिले पनि भन्छौँ नि, तर मेरो त आफ्नै परिवारकै एक्जाम्पल हेर्दा पनि अनि and the same people who've like were able to bend the rules or didn't really need to bend the rules despite not being legally from Nepal, even the way they look at people who are from the Madhesi community is so problematic.
Legally, constitutionally, je bhaye pani citizenship ko actual practice of giving it to people or not giving it to people, the administrator haruko CDO haruko afno prejudice le dictate hune ho. So if you're a dark-skinned person who looks poor and can't speak Nepali, ani application bharda, it's so much more likely that they will just chase you out. And I have actually seen that happen a couple of times. Ever since I was a kid, I've been hearing about that and seeing instances of that happening. So obviously, most of our battle, constitutionally, legally, jun changes bhaira cha, त्यसलाई attention dinu necessary ho. But in addition to that, the actual bureaucrats were putting in charge of this document that has so much importance. Uniharuko pani, I don't know how you change people's values in the short term. And also considering the fact that absolute terms ma pani, a very large percentage of Nepali people, men, women from across the country don't have citizenship. So simplifying that process and addressing the fact that our administrators can tend to be so prejudiced is one part that is just as important, I think, as changing the constitution and changing the laws, because day-to-day life, that's such a massive obstacle to getting any real rights.
But federating Nepal was supposed to be the solution to that problem, right? Or even I feel like language is a good litmus test, like how open people are to using languages other than Nepali. Public sphere may, if you use the language other than Nepali or khas Nepali, then you can see the sort of backlash that a public persona or anyone can get, unless you're quoting songs from a Bollywood movie or something, or you're quoting some dialogue from Sholay. But if you tweet in Hindi, for example, of a public Twitter, त्यस्तो टाइपको ब्याकल्यास आउँछ भने त I feel like to get like indigenous or sort of languages other than Nepali institutionalized, I feel like we have a long way to go, no?
Yeah, definitely. मेरो पनि हेर्ने हो भने, as you can see, my Nepali is quite weak. मेरो first language is Maithili, and I learned English over time. Nepali पनि obviously I speak from being in Kathmandu, but मेरो like matribhasha होइन, and I have no obligation to express all my thoughts in Nepali to be seen as legitimately Nepali, and it's a lot worse for people who only speak Maithili or only speak Bhojpuri or Hindi or any of these other languages. So yeah, linguistic nationalism, it's horrifying that it's still so prominent, but I've also definitely noticed that Hindima tweet gore bhane Indian bhanera त्यो गर्ने.
Yeah.
Okay, Abha, so हामीले धेरै कुराहरु त गर्न, I mean, like we sort of tried to touch on a lot of issues around citizenship, तर जाँदा जाँदै तपाईलाई केही अझै 2 शब्द भन्नु मन छ कि यो विषयमा थप्नु मन छ भने?
I mean, what I have to say is pretty banal. I'm sure a lot of people already know and understand this, but हाम्रो social studies को education is very, very weak. अनि पञ्चायत end भएको like कति वर्ष भइसके पनि हाम्रो education when it comes to what Nepal consists of, who Nepalis are, beyond very like cosmetic level, dhoti लाउँछन्, like different लुगा लाउँछन् type को कुरा बाहेक त्यस्तो deep understanding of the different communities that live in Nepal and different practices they have चाहिँ अलि weaकै छ. So just as we get older, I think all of us owe it to ourselves to try to get a broader understanding of Nepal ko society ko makeup than we've been given by our government. So yeah, I would just encourage linguistic nationalists to examine why they think Nepali Punnu is the only way to be Nepali, or any of these other presumptions people have. And I think that has ramifications for things like citizenship ko debate ma, ko Nepali citizen huna entitled ho ta भन्ने कुरामा जुन त्यो background ideas हुन्छ त्यो definitely आउँछ. So yeah, just seek out more information. I think read more books.
Abha, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation, for giving us your time, for sharing your insights. And, this was so interesting. I wish we could go on for longer. Abha has written extensively on issues of citizenship, on issues of human rights. So please do follow her. Abha, are you on Twitter, or how can people access your writings?
Yeah, I am on Twitter. And I've written an article about citizenship. If anybody wants it, please message me. I'll send it to you.
Great. So yes, please do follow her and follow her work. Once more, Abha, thank you for joining Guff Gaff with Bojubajai.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
This conversation was recorded for Guff Gaff with Bojubajai, a web series presented by Book Bus Nepal. The series was produced by Satori Center for the Arts, QC and Bojubajai. हाम्रो यति लामो गफ गाफ सुनिदिनु भएकोमा धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद. अब कृपया हामीलाई माया प्रेम देखाउनको लागि हाम्रो सोशल मिडियाहरू फेसबुक, इन्स्टाग्राम, ट्विटरमा पनि हामीलाई पछ्याउनु होला र त्यहाँ वाउ बोजुबोजु यु आर सो नाइस, यु आर सो कुल, यु आर सो वाउ भनेर कमेन्ट गर्नु होला. अनि युट्युबमा पनि हामीलाई सब्स्क्राइब गर्नु होला. अनि यदि तपाईलाई हाम्रो लाफ गफ गाफ मन पर्छ, हाम्रो पडकास्ट सुन्नु मन पर्छ र तपाईहरुलाई हाम्रो काम सपोर्ट गर्नु मन छ भने हाम्रो पेट्रन बन्नु होला. Please go to patreon.com/Bojubajai to learn more about how you can support our laugh and Guff Gaff. त्यति नै हो. धन्यवाद धेरै धेरै. We're so excited about the next episode. We're excited about this episode also. Anyway, okay, bye. Stay safe.